Good evening and welcome to this meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on the 26th of November 2024. Seeing quorum in the room, I would like to call the meeting back to order, acknowledging that we are meeting tonight on the unceded and unsurrendered ancestral homelands of the Algonquin Nation. We thank the Algonquin people for hosting us on their land, and I ask that in our meeting, we be mindful of the teachings of traditional Indigenous value systems, which focus on shared wisdom, protection of the land, resources, and children, gratitude, humility, honor, trust, balance, and love of doing well unto others and preventing harm to others. In accordance with the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, I would like to move on to the report from Committee of the Whole in camera. Vice Chair Milburn, would you please present your report?
The board met in camera this evening and reports and recommends as follows: that staff proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to a financial matter, and that staff proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to a human resource matter. That concludes my report.
And the first motion was moved by whom, please? I believe it was Trustee Blackburn, if memory serves me.
The first motion was moved by Trustee Blackburn, which I will second, and the second motion was moved by Trustee Dixon, which I will second.
Thank you very much. We have held our deliberations in camera, and I will now call the question. Mr. Gadley, would you please open the vote in eScribe?
Chair, my eScribe is not loading. It's Justine Bell. I vote in favor.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. And we have the result. The two motions were approved, carried unanimously, 12 in favor. Now, do we have a mover to approve our agenda? Trustee Dixon, seconded by Trustee Nash. Is there any discussion on the agenda? And seeing none, I will call the question on the agenda as presented. All those in favor? Opposed? And that motion is carried. I have a briefing for you this evening. I begin with the fact that membership applications for the OCDSB Advisory Committee on Equity, also known as ACE, are open. If you are interested in supporting the OCDSB to be a more equitable and inclusive learning and workplace community, the Advisory Committee on Equity provides that platform and opportunity. ACE members include parents, guardians, caregivers, community partners, students, and trustees. The deadline for applications is December the 6th. More details are available on our website. And I also have some very great news. Jessica McIntyre, an educator at Glebe Collegiate Institute, has been recognized with the prestigious Governor General's History Award for Excellence in Teaching. This national honor acknowledges her innovative contributions to Project True North, an OCDSB initiative that sheds light on individuals whose voices, stories, and contributions have been missing from common narratives about Canadian history. You can read about this incredible achievement on our website. And finally, a reminder that Friday, November the 29th is a PA day. All OCDSB schools and early on centers will be closed. Are there any questions? And seeing none, Mr. Director, could we please have your briefing?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to share this evening, in the coming weeks, students and families will have several opportunities to learn more about high school and the amazing programs that we offer. Join us on Thursday, December 5th from 6 to 7:30 p.m. for a virtual information session about the OCDSB Secondary Gifted Program. Learn more about the program, admission criteria, application process, and timelines for the 2025-2026 school year. Details are on our website. Join us tomorrow evening, November 27th, for the All About High School virtual information session to learn about subjects and disciplines, programs and services, as well as other exciting aspects of secondary school. Our website also has the details on this event tomorrow. Over the next few months, OCDSB secondary schools will be hosting their own in-person information sessions for students and their families. It's a fantastic way to visit the school, become acquainted and oriented with the site, and meet some of the staff there to serve our students. More information about these events will also be available on our website and, of course, through our school communities. Thank you.
Are there any questions for the director? Any questions on topics that are not covered in the briefing should be raised when we get to new business. So I am not seeing any questions now, which moves us on to item 10 on our agenda, report from the student trustees who have a brief report for us this evening. I will call upon student trustee Siva Sathya Nathan.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good evening, trustees, director, and members of the community. My name is Sharanya Sivasathyanathan, and I'm pleased to provide an update on the recent activities my peers and I have worked on to enhance student engagement and advocacy across the OCDSB. On October 10th, the student trustees held our first virtual meeting with the OCDSB's official committee representing secondary students' views, the Student Senate, which includes a junior and senior senator from each high school. During this meeting, we had the opportunity to hear about and discuss the elementary program review. Senators emphasized the importance of ensuring that every school can support all our students, including our ESL learners and those with special education needs. Gathering this input was a meaningful way for the senators to share their unique perspectives, and I want to extend my gratitude to the staff who made this consultation possible. In early November, we convened in an in-person Senate meeting to identify key priorities for the year. Topics included integrating artificial intelligence into schools to prepare students for future careers, supporting students' mental and physical well-being in the context of social media misuse, and continuing to create the Student Senate newsletter to connect with our students. These discussions will help focus our efforts on addressing issues that directly impact students' experiences. We welcome future opportunities to provide student feedback on these and other important topics. Later in November, Student Trustee Zhang, Student Trustee De Stefano, and I attended OCDSB's Fall General Meeting, an amazing professional development opportunity for student trustees across Ontario. As members of OCDSB's leadership team, Student Trustee Zhang and I contributed to organizing this event, which featured sessions on topics such as creative problem solving, as well as truth and reconciliation. OPSPA President Kathleen Woodcock, OSTA alumni, and other education stakeholders were among the many outstanding guest speakers that we heard from. One session that stood out to me focused on leading with empathy and reaching out to students who are not yet connected to or engaged in advocacy. In my role as chair of the Student Wellbeing Advocacy Interest Group, I led sessions at the conference that focused on equipping student trustees with strategies to assess the effectiveness of mental health resources in their school communities via School Mental Health Ontario's #HereNowON focus groups. In this, I also shared steps that the OCDSB has taken to promote mental and physical health in our students, such as the recent Mental Health Champions Initiative, to inspire student-led action in other school boards. It was inspiring to see so many student leaders eager to bring these ideas back to their communities and create meaningful change. These experiences have reaffirmed my commitment, along with my fellow student trustees, to amplifying student voices and fostering supportive, inclusive environments in our schools. We remain dedicated to ensuring that the students' needs identified by our senators are brought to the table and that we're taking steps to empower students to engage actively in their education. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Are there any questions for our student trustees on their report? And I am seeing none. That was very thorough and much appreciated. Thank you. Moving on then, we have delegations, and this evening we have one delegation. I would like to call on Elise Schipper regarding the ACE policy. Please go to the podium and welcome Ms. Schipper or Skipper. You'll have to tell me which that is. Schipper, thank you. You have 2 minutes for your delegation this evening. And after that, there might be up to 3 questions for clarification from trustees. There should be a timer visible for you on the screen, just so you can keep track of your time.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead when you're ready.
Thanks for allowing me to speak this evening. I'm here as a mother, as someone with firsthand experience of lived experience of intergenerational trauma and discrimination and real-time trauma and discrimination. I'd like to address the recommendations for proposed revisions to the current policy P008.gov as recommended by the ACE Policy Review Committee. Specifically, proposed revisions to section 4.6, which removed by Trustee Blackburn, suggest very specific and explicit member composition that would aim to represent the fulsome diversity and inclusiveness of the school community. While the stated purpose of the defined list of members is to prioritize those that represent the most underserved students in relation to academic achievement, disciplinary action, and well-being, it would be preferable to ensure that there is broad representation from a variety of backgrounds, skills, and lived experience to ensure that the important work of the ACE is thorough, strategic, and effective. However, as was noted in the meeting minutes from the discussion that followed, this defined list of identity-based groups does not encompass the broad diversity of the student population and the broader community. I'm concerned that in attempting to define who should be included, the proposal inadvertently excludes important voices and contributors. To be clear, I believe that the ACE committee has very important work to do, and I'm fully supportive of this work. I would, however, propose that a more effective strategy would be to guide the work of this committee through well-defined objectives, specific milestones, and clear deliverables. As set out by senior district staff in memo 24061, this could be achieved by appointing 8 individual members and 5 community organizations with a cross-section of qualified individuals, including those with lived experience, who have overcome barriers and who are affiliated with the broader community. Lastly, while this purports to prioritize those that represent the most underserved students in relation to academic achievement, disciplinary action, and well-being, do I need to wrap up now?
Go ahead, please, until you're done. I
Thank
think
you.
you're
I'm
at
almost
the end.
finished. It seems a glaring omission to have left the group currently facing the highest levels of reported hate crimes and discrimination, of which I am a member, off this list. The well-being of Jewish students seems to be, by its omission, to be of less concern to members of ACE and this review committee than those who were included on the list. That said, recognizing the needs of communities may change over time, and that there are moments in time when the needs of one community may require more attention and support than those of another, I encourage you to reject the motion that the Policy Review Committee has put before you and adopt the recommendations made in Memo 24061 as being the more inclusive, effective, coherent, and strategic path forward.
Thank you very much for your
Thank you.
delegation. And I will ask if there are any questions for the delegate. And I'm not seeing any. You've been very clear. Much appreciated. And we will be discussing the ACE policy shortly in our meeting, and you are welcome to stay for that discussion.
Thank you very much.
Moving on then to confirmation of board minutes. Do we have a mover to confirm the minutes of our board meeting on the 29th of October 2024 and our organizational board meeting on the 12th of November 2024? Trustee Kaplan-Murth, seconded by Trustee Dixon. Are there any errors or omissions in either set of minutes? Seeing none, then I will call the question. All those in favor of confirming both sets of minutes and opposed, and the motion is carried. Is there any business arising from the minutes of the 29th of October 2024 or the 12th of November 2024? And again, I'm seeing none, so we can move on to item 14 on our agenda, matters for action. And at this point, I will call upon Trustee Blackburn to present an oral report from the Audit Committee meeting held last night on the 25th of November, 2024. Trustee Blackburn.
Sorry, thank you, Madam Chair. The Audit Committee met last night, November 25th, 2024, and on a motion by Trustee Jennings, which I will second, our committee recommends that the draft 2023-24 consolidated financial statements attached as Appendix A to Report 24-126 be approved.
Thank you. Before I ask if this is a consent item, I will ask if there's any comment from Associate Director Giroir or from our external auditors. I believe that Aaron Butler, representing KPMG, our external auditor, is also here this evening.
Through you, Chair. The only comment that I would make is that this is an important part of the board's fiduciary responsibilities to approve these draft financial statements. They were prepared by board but audited by KPMG, and there were no significant findings or qualifications in these statements. So I would, and they are separate from the presentation later on this evening about our district's financial results. So I would encourage, if you have any questions, to ask the questions, but I would encourage you to approve these draft financial statements so we can meet our ministerial requirements to submit them and make them official.
Thank you. And did you wish to make any comment, Ms. Butler?
Point of order, Madam Chair. Can she speak
Okay.
into a microphone so that people online
Could you
can hear?
just move up to the table and turn the mic on, please?
Thank you.
I don't know how to
Try.
try. Oh, is this on? Perfect.
There, it's on.
We're off to a
It's
good
on.
start. So just wanted to say that we did issue a clean unmodified audit opinion and that the financial statements do present fairly in all material respects. So no significant findings from our end.
Thank you so much. And before you leave the mic, I will ask if there are any questions that are specific to the financial statements. We will have an opportunity to talk about the financial situation in more detail later, but if there's anything on the statements themselves, now's the time. And I'm not seeing any questions, so thank you very much. And thank you, Associate Director. And since we had no questions, I will ask, is this a consent item? And seeing no objection, we will take the vote on this with any of the other consent items after item 14.3 on our agenda. Thank you, Trustee Blackburn, for your reports. Moving on then to 14.2, I will call upon Vice Chair Milburn to present the report from the Committee of the Whole meeting on the 5th of November, 2024.
I will now move receipt of the November 5th, 2024 Committee of the Whole report.
And so you are moving receipt. We need a seconder for that. Trustee Nash, thank you. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? And seeing none, I will ask all those in favor of receipt and opposed, and the motion is carried. Vice Chair Milburn?
There were no recommendations in this report, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to item 14.3, report from the Policy Review Committee. I will call upon Trustee Lyra, who was serving as acting chair of that meeting, to present the report from the meeting on the 14th of November.
I'd like to move receipt of the 14th of November, 2024 Policy Committee report.
Seconded by Trustee Presley. Are there any errors or omissions in this report? And seeing none, I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor and opposed, and that motion is carried. Trustee Lyra?
The report reads on a motion by trustee Blackburn, which I will second, that policy P.084.SCO, student safety patrols, be rescinded.
And I will ask if this is a consent item. And I'm seeing no objection, so we will take the vote on that with other consent items following item 14.3. Trustee Lyra?
Thank you, Madam Chair. On a motion by trustee Milburn, which I will second, that proposed revisions to policy P.008.gov, Advisory Committee on Equity, attached as report 24-115 as Appendix B, be approved as amended, attached as Appendix A.
And noting that staff have provided supplementary information relating to this policy, is this a consent item? And I am seeing that it is not. So we will deal with it under item 14.4. Is there anything further from the meeting, Trustee Lara?
There are no further recommendations in this report.
Thank you very much. And so we do have two motions for which we have consent: the approval of the draft consolidated financial statements and the rescission of the policy on student safety patrols. If you could please open the vote. Trustee Bell, have you been able to vote with the scribe this time?
No, unfortunately, I haven't. I vote in favor. Thank you.
Thank you. And both of these motions are carried, 12 in favor, none opposed. So we have approved our consolidated financial statements and we have rescinded the policy on student safety patrols. And that brings us to the non-consent items. This evening, we have one non-consent item, namely the revisions to the Advisory Committee on Equity Policy. And before I go to Trustee Milburn to introduce her motion, I will ask if staff has any comment regarding the supplementary information that was provided. Mr. Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, no additional commentary on staff's part beyond what was added in the memorandum shared with the Board of Trustees.
Thank you. Trustee Milburn.
Okay, I will give staff a moment. I am bringing forward 3 proposed amendments this evening. And I will give staff a moment to bring up my amendment that I shared in advance. While staff are bringing this up, I am bringing forward this amendment because I wanted to ensure that we are speaking to the intersectionality that members of the Advisory Committee on Equity may hold. I really would like to take a moment to thank Deeptika from the Advisory Committee on Equity. Without her input into this proposed amendment, it would not have come forward in this way, and I can't thank her enough. It's really important that we as the board empower our Advisory Committee on Equity to focus on identities and communities that might be underserved. And they can do this by focusing their attention on the educational outcomes evidenced by recent district academic achievement data and informed district disciplinary data and well-being data. By bringing forward this amendment, I'm hoping it will speak to the intersectionality of all members on ACE, and I will ask that all of my colleagues support this amendment. I'm looking forward to a discussion. Thank you.
And we need a seconder for that. And I believe Trustee Kaplan-Murth had put her hand up to second. Is that correct?
I did. I also wanted to be on the speakers list. I was putting up my hand for that. Yeah.
That will come after we've dealt with Trustee Milburn's amendments.
Okay.
Or did you say you had a sub-amendment?
Well, yes, if there can be a sub-amendment.
So it's a change to what is on the screen.
Yes.
And in that case, go ahead and I will keep on putting together a speakers list here.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I wanted to just change the order of the sentence that begins with focus to say that it should focus on district well-being data as well as the identities and community. Focus on the identities and communities reinforces the okay, so it would be focused on the identities and communities reinforces the committee's attention to district well-being data and to educational outcomes. I think that's an important, it's not just a semantic change because well-being data needs to be one of the core principles that we're supporting here.
So Trustee Kaplan, let's just make sure that your amendment is properly reflected
Well-being
on the
data.
screen, and we will need a seconder for it as well.
So you would say attention to district well-being data and educational outcomes. That's informed by district disciplinary action data and district well-being data. Like that's fine, but it needs to say that we're looking at well-being as well as educational outcomes. Maybe actually, to make it just semantically better, it should say district well-being and educational outcomes, comma, as evidenced by, and then all the data. Yeah.
And do we have a seconder for this sub-amendment? And I'm not seeing anybody who is prepared to second the sub-amendment, so
Can I give introduction to why I wanted to make that amendment, that sub-amendment?
unfortunately, no, you can speak to the main motion, but the sub-amendment before you, when you start, it needs to be moved, which you've done. It needs to be seconded, which didn't happen. And so if you have other comments on the main motion, you still have your speaking time on the amendment.
Now?
Yes.
Okay, well, as we've heard from our delegate this evening, and as we've said in our strategic plan and in all of our reports on student well-being, well-being isn't only a measure of educational outcome, it's also whether students feel included and safe and supported in our school environments. And that is part of the work of ACE, it's part of the work of our human rights policies, and it behooves us to include well-being and educational outcomes. I think it's really important, the changes that Trustee Milburn has suggested in terms of not listing specific groups. But we have spoken before to the importance of well-being, and not every student is going to be academically suffering. Some of them will be suffering for other reasons.
Thank you very much for that. And I just want to confirm with staff, so what we are seeing now on the screen is back to Trustee Milburn's original amendment. Is that correct? So I have on my list, the next speaker is Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I voted against the inclusion of the list at committee. I find the creation of a list doesn't strike a good balance between representation and tokenization. It creates too many opportunities for people to try and fill out the committee with picking exactly one person from each group on the list, and I don't think that is in the spirit of ACE or in the best interest of the OCDSB. I'm very happy with the changes that have been proposed. I hear what has been said about the importance of well-being. I do note well-being data has been included. And so I do think that ACE has well-being as part of their core mandate, as part of their terms of reference, and included in this section. I think as an educational institution, or as an education institution, it is not unduly inappropriate to make educational outcomes the priority of the committees that we are striking. And so for those reasons, I am willing to support the amendment as it has been put forward by Trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Trustee Lara. Trustee Dixon, I have you next.
Through you, Chair. I just have one question. I don't know if I'm allowed to ask questions right now. So before the ACE policy is ratified, will it be brought back to the Advisory Committee on Equity so that members can review and understand the recommend changes, or?
No, the committee has had extensive discussions on it. This is the board's decision tonight on the policy. And once if we decide in favor of the policy with whatever amendments are put forward, then the policy will be in effect. Did you have anything further on the amendment?
Section 4.6 states that members will provide people and organizations representing the most underserved students and communities.
We're speaking specifically to the amendment here,
Okay.
which is what is on the screen. So
Okay, Chair.
if you
That's
want
it.
to be on the list for the main motion, I'll put you on the list.
Thank you.
Other speakers on this amendment? And I'm not seeing any, so I will go back to you, Trustee Milburn, for wrap up on the amendment.
I hope that everyone supports this amendment. And again, thank you to the collaboration with Deeptika from ACE for helping me bring this forward. That's everything.
Thank you. So I will call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? And opposed? And the amendment is carried. Did you have something else, Trustee Milburn?
Yes, I have a second amendment to bring forward. Under section 3.4, I would like to add bullet VI under section B, advise the Board of Trustees. I will give staff a moment to bring it up, but I would like the bullet to read, providing feedback on how to create equitable and inclusive education for underserved students identified in recent district research, district identity-based data, and relevant and rigorous external research.
And is there a seconder for this amendment? Trustee Presley will second that. Did you have any further introduction, Trustee Milburn, or is that it?
That would be everything. My comments from the previous amendment still hold true.
And so if that's it, I think everybody has a chance to read it. And I will ask if this amendment is friendly. And I'm not seeing any objections, so we will incorporate that as a friendly amendment without further debate. And did you have any more amendments?
Yes, one final amendment, and it is a very small one, so I apologize that I did not send it in advance. On the last page for the ACE policy definition of LGBTQIA+, there is a missing A on the acronym, and if we can include that, that would be appreciated. So my amendment is to include the letter A in the acronym.
And I don't know if we actually need to do that as an amendment.
I'm
or
going to
was
look to
it-
the executive officer to clarify what page number, as this was assistance from him that I am bringing this forward.
Through you, Chair, I believe this was actually an amendment that was suggested at the Policy Review Committee. I think, if I remember correctly, it might have been Trustee Lyra that pointed it out, and it should have been incorporated into the changes that reached here tonight, but unfortunately it wasn't. So the quickest way of getting it done is probably to just have it done through an amendment here tonight.
That sounds reasonable. Do we have a seconder for that amendment? Trustee Forty? And is it a friendly amendment to make this correction? And that is good. So that amendment is also incorporated as friendly. And if you have nothing further, I will move down on my speakers list on the main motion, going next to Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
I didn't need to be added again. I'm good, thank you.
And so you do not wish to speak at this time?
No, I think I support the proposed.
Thank you. Trustee Dixon? On the main motion? Did you have anything further to say on the main motion?
Can I ask through you, Chair, about section 4.3?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you. So section 4.3 of the ACE policy lists non-voting members, including the director or designated. Past practice has been to appoint a board representative with lived experience and community connection. How will we ensure that this practice continue under the updated policy?
And I will refer that, given the language that is in that section, I will refer that to staff, Mr. Director.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'm just asking our executive officer to check the language 4.3, just to be sure that the spirit of Trustee Dixon's comment would remain in place moving forward in this policy update.
Through you, Chair, the typical practice has been that the director's designate is the senior staff member responsible for that area, that portfolio. And in this case, the senior staff member assigned to ACE is the senior staff member responsible for the equity team, which obviously as the advisory committee on equity would be the appropriate senior staff member. And I have no reason to believe that that practice would not continue.
Trustee Dixon?
Two more. Section 4.6 states that members will prioritize people and organization representing the most underserved students and community. How will the membership committee identify which group of students and communities are most underserved if specific groups are not explicitly listed in the policy?
And again, I will ask staff for a response on that.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll begin and turn it over to staff for additional comment. Based on the amended motion brought forward, the spirit of that would be for the committee to look at the data that's related to achievement and well-being, as well as other categories such as the suspension as was indicated in the amended motion. So the spirit of the amended motion would be that all of those factors would be taken into consideration in order to determine the composition of the committee.
And
Through you, Madam Chair, sorry, all serving towards educational outcomes. That's how staff reads that educational outcomes tie to achievement, well-being, and other factors.
And Trustee Dixon, you had another question.
Yes. Section 4.6 states that the community with prioritized members for people and organization representing the most underserved students and communities, including those subject to discrimination on a protest grounds as defined by policy P.147.gov. Human rights, how will the board ensure that the committee members effectively reflect the full diversity of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board community and prioritize these underserved groups?
Director?
Again, through you, Madam Chair, the spirit of the motion and the amended version would be for the district to look at educational outcomes holistically, consider achievement and well-being, learning and wellness, as well as other related factors in the composition of that committee. There's an understanding on staff's part that may ebb and flow over time. There may be certain groups who would, or certain organizations, certain individuals who would need to be prioritized at one given time. That might change over time. So I think staff understands the spirit of what's intended in the motion, and we'll share that, of course, as the Executive Officer Mark has indicated through members of the senior team that are the liaison for that particular ACE committee.
Anything further, Trustee Dixon?
No, Chair, that was 4 questions I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other speakers to the main motion? And I am not, or sorry, yes, to the main motion. So I am not seeing any, so we're going back to you, Trustee Milburn, for wrap up.
I hope that everyone supports this policy for ACE. It's a very important policy. And I look forward to the vote.
And Mr. Gottlieb, could you please open the vote in eScribe so that we can vote on the motion regarding the policy as amended in committee and this evening? And the motion to approve the revisions to policy P.008.gov Advisory Committee on Equity are carried unanimously, 12 in favor. And we can move on then. The next item on our agenda, 14.5, relates to a board member code of conduct. And do we have our integrity commissioner available at this point? We will just take about a 5-minute recess at this point.
Good evening, it's Suzanne Craig here.
We could hear you, Suzanne, but I don't think they can.
Okay, thank you so much, Trustee Bell.
I will ask trustees and staff please to take their seats. I would like to call us back in order momentarily. And we are now, since I have quorum in the room again, I will call us back to order for item 14.5 relating to the board member code of conduct. And at this point, I would like to welcome Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig to present her report. Ms. Craig?
Thank you very much, Chair Scott and members of the board. I have before you the Code of Conduct investigation into the allegations of behavior of Trustee Donna Blackburn. For respect for your time, I will not be making a presentation. You have the report before you. I am available for any questions on clarity that you may require of me. I just want to remind members of the board respectfully that I will not reopen my investigation. You have before you my findings of fact. You certainly may disagree with my findings. You may have a different interpretation of my findings. But as the objective and third-party office that you have delegated the investigation to, I present to you the findings in the report before you and the recommendation that I have with respect to my findings. I'll take any questions that you may have.
And so to begin, I will ask trustees if there are any questions on the report. And for the purpose of having any questions answered, I think it would be appropriate if we operate under rules of committee, as this is our first opportunity to discuss the Integrity Commissioner's report. Trustees will therefore have 3 minutes to speak and may speak more than once. And when we get into dealing with any motions that come forward, we will revert to our regular board rules of procedure if the board is agreeable to that. And I'm not seeing any disagreement. So I have a speakers list for questions started here, beginning with Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Quick question for you. Does that mean you don't want motions at this time?
At this time, the purpose is to understand the report, and then once we have finished that, we will deal with motions.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Suzanne Craig. It seems you and I only get a chance to meet in the most odious of circumstances. But my only question for you is a rehash of the same question I asked you last time, and that is, you have before us, you've presented to us both a series of facts and an interpretation of those facts. It is the board's right and responsibility to take the facts that you have presented and interpret and come to a conclusion. Our conclusion can be the same as yours, our conclusion may be different to yours, but that is my understanding of the role with which the board has empowered or entrusted itself.
Through the chair, you're correct, Trustee Lyra.
Excellent. That is the only question I had for you. Thank you for the report before us and for taking the time to come and speak with us. And I'd like to go on the list when motions are available.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. And next on my list, I have Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, I have a series of questions. So if I don't get through all my questions in my first 3 minutes, I'll ask to be put back on the list. So Integrity Commissioner Craig, you wrote in your report that you have determined that the comments do not meet the definition of discriminatory under the Human Rights Code. Is it possible to find discrimination against people of color? Is it possible to find discrimination against someone who is Asian or South Asian? Is it possible to find discrimination against a person who is Muslim or who identifies as transgender? Obviously, the answer is yes to all of those things. Does the OCDSB Human Rights Policy or our OCDSB Code of Conduct, Policy 3.7, include a definition of people of color, or of Asian, or of South Asian, or of Muslim, or of Islamophobia, or of transphobia? No, it does not. Would you require any such definition to be formalized in order to find discrimination if a community member, staff, student, or colleague were to claim that they were discriminated against? No, of course not. So my first question is, why did you seek a definition of anti-Semitism in order to guide your decision as to whether Trustee Blackburn's conduct in this complaint was discriminatory? And how can you reasonably assert that Trustee Blackburn's conduct was not anti-Semitic discrimination?
Thank you. Yes, through the chair to Trustee Kaplan-Murth. So your question is well received, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. And the reason that I set out before you in the report, in particular in page 22, relates not so much to what I believe, because of course I am your integrity commissioner, I am the fact finder, and what you have before you is my report. So without a doubt, I claim ownership of this report, but I also sought guidance from the courts. I certainly do not hold myself above the erudite intelligence of the courts. And if I can, with your indulgence, Chair Scott, I'll just read from the report. And it says on page 22 of the report, 143 of the package, in reaching my conclusion, I considered a recent decision of the Superior Court of Justice in University of Toronto versus Doe et al., in which the court noted that there is no commonly understood definition of anti-Semitism. The court considered an urgent request to remove an encampment. Then as you go down, you see that I set out what the court wrote. And the court said, part of the controversy arises out of the absence of an agreed upon definition of anti-Semitism. That too is a matter of some debate. Different Jewish intervener groups proposed different definitions of anti-Semitism and criticized each other's definitions in the submissions. The university's own working group on anti-Semitism has refused to adopt the definitions advanced. What I can't do, through you, Chair, and to you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, is decide what definition I must use. I look to the organization for which I am appointed as Integrity Commissioner to provide me with a definition. Some of the groups that you named, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, do not have an inconsistent definition of what they are. And it is my supposition that part of the reason that there is not a seeking of definition of some of these groups is because these groups, broadly speaking, because you can't speak for an entirety of a group, these groups are quite clear on what, broadly speaking, the diaspora of Black is, or broadly speaking, what the diaspora of Asian is. And so I looked to the courts to assist me in guiding me in this very difficult analysis.
So I'll continue. I still have time on my first 3 minutes. So in response to that, I would have to say that you're using an example of the Superior Court of Justice in the University of Toronto. However, the premise that you are starting with is that the reference of power of the Jewish community is in dispute, and it is actually one of the most common anti-Semitic tropes used to illustrate Jew hate in every definition of anti-Semitism, including the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition and the Jerusalem definition. In fact, in those cases that you're describing at University of Toronto, all Jewish people would agree that that is anti-Semitism. In 2020, the province of Ontario adopted the working definition of anti-Semitism as adopted by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance in Ontario Order in Council 1420 of 2020. Did you seek a legal opinion about whether that order in council is binding on the OCDSB's policies and procedures? As distinguished from the University of Toronto situation, we are actually an organization under the umbrella of the Government of Ontario. In example number 2 of that handbook on anti-Semitism, which is accepted by Canada and accepted by Ontario, making mendacious, dehumanizing, demonizing, or stereotypical allegations about Jews as such, or the power of Jews as a collective, such as, but especially, or not exclusively, the myth about a world Jewish conspiracy or of Jews controlling the media, economy, government, or other societal institutions. That is a prime example of anti-Semitism.
Ms. Craig?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm not sure I caught the question, but because I don't want to use Trustee Kaplan-Murth's time, I did receive and did seek legal opinions to assist me and guide me in my analysis. And I did not determine that the board uses any particular reference that you have just made. And I did state in the report that I recommend, although it is not my position right now, because what you have before you is a complaint investigation report, but it is my recommendation that the board does seek parameters, including those which you've just stated, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. I don't disagree with that, but what I had before me was what I had before me. I did talk about how in two instances, I believe that the comments of the respondent did violate the code because it did speak to a trope of power of a particular group, in this case, the Jewish community. And I stated why I felt that that was a violation of the code, but also why I felt that it was an inadvertence. And it is up to the board at this time to determine if they would like to receive my findings or not.
Thank you very much for that. You're out of time now, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
If you can put me back on the list, please.
And I can put you back on the list. And next on my list, I have Trustee Milburn.
I can be taken off the list at this time, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry, say again?
I can be taken off the list at this time, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Are there first-time speakers with questions? And I'm seeing none, so I will go back to you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. My second question is, you also wrote that the complainant has not established an adverse impact due to the comments. Please explain whether Human Rights Code or the OCDSB Code of Conduct requires a complainant to prove an adverse impact in order to find discrimination. What did you do to try to determine whether there was an adverse impact to the complainant, the other individuals involved, or the community at large? For example, you never spoke to me, which I think is a procedural issue. You never spoke to me to ask me how I was impacted. You never spoke with the Jewish teacher or the community that was impacted by this. So how have you determined that there was no adverse impact?
Through you, Chair Scott, to Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Most of the, if not all of the alleged contraventions of the comments of the respondent were written. And based on that, I did not feel that I had to speak to other individuals, including you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth, as one of the witnesses. I do not state who the complainant is at any time, publicly or to the respondent. So at this point, we do not know who the complainant is, but I did not speak to, as you said, those individuals that you listed, because I felt that it was not necessary to reach a conclusion based on the information that I had. I had written statements, I had messengers, Facebook Messenger conversations and emails. I did speak to two other individuals, one of whom was the respondent. I don't want to disclose personal information about the respondent, but the respondent identified to me that there was a need for an accommodation because of difficulty with this matter, and I will leave it at that. Thank you.
So I'll just reiterate that you cannot state in your report that you did not establish an adverse impact when you did not actually reach out to the traumatized individuals. And again, there was a bias in your presentation in saying you reached out to the respondent to find out about accommodations.
Trustee Kaplan-Murth, I will ask you to.
So I'll move on to my next question. I have time. My next question is, you also wrote that Trustee Blackburn violated Rule 3.1 of the code, but that you determined that the violations were a result of an error of judgment made in good faith. Please explain, when Trustee Blackburn's conduct is recurrent, when she directs this discrimination at a Jewish teacher, a Jewish community, as well as a Jewish trustee, how is that made in good faith?
You're muted, Ms. Craig.
My apologies. Through you, Chair Scott, to Trustee Kaplan-Murth. So I did find in 2 instances that that the respondent did violate the code. I did find that in one of those instances, there was a private conversation between 2 acquaintances. And while that does not absolve an individual from ensuring that they are respectful, as I said in the first part of the report, it did not rise to the level of discrimination. It is clear in my report, I believe, that an error in judgment in good faith is not absolving a member of their actions. But as I point out in some of the examples, good faith, as opposed to bad faith, is that one was not willfully trying to break the rules. And in this case, I found that the respondent was not. For the rest of your understanding, certainly I direct you to the report.
I have one more question. In the past, you have made a similar finding in complaints about anti-Semitism at York Regional District School Board and Toronto District School Board, as well as making decisions in the past here. You have said publicly in interviews that if you were faced with cases in which you could be perceived to have bias, you would recuse yourself. Why did you not recuse yourself for this complaint?
Thank you, Trustee Kaplan-Murth. Through you, Chair Scott, I do not believe that I have bias. My role as an integrity commissioner is to apply the rules of the code to allegations of wrongdoing. Necessarily, and very often, I will have the same or oftentimes frequent trustees or members of council before me that I have to investigate. The province in creating accountability and transparency and the Office of the Integrity Commissioner intended for this officer to have situations that are reoccurring. In fact, the code rules, whether they be 1 or 17, all hold the same wrongdoing premise. And so if I am going to investigate whether someone violated the conflict of interest rules or harassment or gifts and benefits or undue influence, I cannot be precluded, says the legislature, says the creation of accountability regimes, I cannot be precluded from ever investigating that type of wrongdoing again, and I cannot be precluded from ever investigating a trustee or a counselor more than once. You are correct. If I believe that I have bias or animus towards an individual that is subject of a complaint, I will recuse myself, and I did not think so in this case.
So my final question is, have you read the Canadian Handbook on the IRA Working Definition of Anti-Semitism? And do you recognize that Ontario and Canada have adopted that as an official definition of anti-Semitism?
Through you, Chair Scott, yes, I have.
Thank you. That's all.
And thank you very much. I'm not seeing any further questions with regard to the report at this time. We very much appreciate your answers. And moving on, in accordance with our board member code of conduct policy, we must first decide whether there was a breach of the code. In our decision-making, we must consider the facts contained in the Integrity Commissioner's report and not consider any facts other than those that are set out in her report. The respondent was given an opportunity to review and comment on the report. And if Trustee Blackburn is found to be in breach of the code of conduct, the board must also consider sanctions. As the respondent, Trustee Blackburn may not participate in the debate or vote on any motion with respect to the complaint made against her. Under current legislation and board policy, the board is not required to follow the Integrity Commissioner's recommendation regarding a breach, but it must make its own decision based on those facts. And I have a speakers list already, beginning with Trustee Lyra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you could throw it on the screen, that would be great. So I would like to move that the board find a breach of sanctions on items 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, and 3.9 of the Code of Conduct.
And is there a seconder for this? Trustee Kaplan Mertz will second that. Sorry, you're not seconding it? Oh, you are.
Just asking to be added to the speakers list.
And so we have a motion here. And on the speakers list for this particular motion, I have trustee Milburn and I will add trustee Kaplan Mirth as well. And go ahead with your introduction, trustee Lyra, 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. So we are tasked by our policies and provincial legislation to take the Integrity Commissioner's report, look at the facts, weigh the recommendations, and come to our own decisions. On page 16 of the Integrity Commissioner's report, there is a presentation of fact where the respondent says something about the power of the Jewish community in relation to other communities. This is a well-known anti-Semitic trope. And while I understand the Integrity Commissioner's position with regards to the difficulty with from the courts and the University of Toronto and the other cases that have been looked at, we have a bar that is higher than criminal when it comes to accountability for trustees. We have expectations of politeness, we have expectations of civility that are higher than those set out in a criminal court. And so I am of the position that a trustee who has spouted an anti-Semitic trope has violated section 3.5 of our Code of Conduct, which says that we must inspire public confidence in the abilities and integrity of the board. I think the abilities and integrity of the board are undermined if we are, if members of the board are found to be saying things that are well-known anti-Semitic tropes. Item 3.6 says that when acting or holding themselves out as a board member, trustees shall conduct themselves in a manner that would not discredit or compromise the integrity of the board. I am of the belief that, again, anti-Semitic tropes discredit the integrity of the board. 3.7 speaks very specifically to this. It talks about how trustees shall treat all persons equally without discrimination, and it lists a person's race, ancestry, place of origin, marital status, family status, etc. This provision applies to all forms of written and oral communications. And on page 16 of the report before us, there is written communication that, again, is a well-known anti-Semitic trope. And finally, I believe that item 3.9 has been violated because it says that board members shall ensure their comments are issue-based and not personal, demeaning, or disparaging with regards to board staff or fellow board members. This was a message in a conversation with a member of a marginalized group who is one of our staff. And for those reasons, I believe that item 3.9 has been violated. This is always a tough conversation to have as trustees, but we talk a great deal about equity and we talk a great deal about holding ourselves to a higher standard and holding ourselves publicly accountable. And I am of the belief that if we want to set a good example for the students and the staff in the district that we lead, we need to hold ourselves to a higher bar than not technically criminal. And so for those reasons, I would encourage my colleagues to find a breach. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And in terms of speakers to the motion, I will go next to trustee Milburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On 5 previous occasions in my term as trustee, I have spoken to the fact that we as school board trustees need to hold ourselves to a higher level of respect when it comes to interactions with one another and with our community. To be clear about my definition of respect, respect is honoring oneself and others through words and actions, supporting diversity of beliefs and treating the world and everything in it with dignity. To say that I am disappointed that we are in the midst and discussing another code of conduct investigation would be an understatement. We as trustees approved and signed this new code of conduct and have discussed and amended it numerous times in our term. We agreed to do better. We agreed to show each other and our community respect. I hear time and time again from everyone around this table that we want to foster an environment for healthy discussion, for respect, and to make our education system for better for everyone in it. Yet here we are again. I want to thank the Integrity Commissioner for her investigation. Even if I disagree with the recommendations of the report, I know a lot of work went into this investigation. To me, the facts are clear. Harm has been done to our community, and in particular to our Jewish staff member. The level of respect I want from around this table was not met. The remarks made by the trustees show that we have not lived up to the definition of respect and that we do not value the diversity of everyone around the table. As trustees, every single one of us contributed to this environment. I have asked and I have pleaded for us to do better and to live in an increased level of respect around the table. I continue to watch incidences that do not meet this level of respect. We all agreed to this code of conduct. I want to show our community we can do better, which is why I will be supporting this breach of the code of conduct. I want to reiterate, we are trustees for a school board district. In school, even in early grades, students are taught how to use their words to resolve conflict, show each other respect, and to say we are sorry. Every single one of us around this table needs to look at the instances that led up to this investigation, reflect upon them and how we contributed, and agree on how we can do better. In closing, I want to say most importantly, I am very sorry to everyone in our community, and in particular to every person that was harmed during this. You as our community deserve better, you deserve a higher level of respect, and you deserve better from us. This investigation and this report are absolutely not a win for anyone around this table, and it's certainly what you as our community do not deserve. I am so sorry that we are back here again, and I will be supporting this breach.
Thank you, Trustee Milburn. I now move on to Trustee Kaplan-Murth.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Discrimination can take many forms. It might even be difficult to identify, especially for those who are not part of a targeted community. This is not one of those cases. This complaint includes clear, egregious acts of anti-Semitism, regardless of whether there is any official definition. In Integrity Commissioner Suzanne Craig's report, she refuses to acknowledge discrimination targeting Jews or to hold Trustee Blackburn accountable for her undeniable anti-Semitism. Between August 15th, 2024 and August 25th, 2024, Trustee Blackburn made repeated discriminatory comments about the Jewish community and conducted herself in a way that discredited and compromised the integrity of the board. This included discriminatory comments in communication by email and text message with Jewish community members and Jewish OCDSB teacher, discriminatory comments to me as a trustee, and lobbying OCDSB staff and students to join her in discriminatory ways. In the report, Commissioner Craig dismisses and diminishes the harm to the Jewish community on the basis that there is no commonly understood definition of anti-Semitism. We do not quibble over formal definitions of discrimination when it pertains to any other form of hate. Substitute any other equity-seeking group or a minority into the scenarios that I asked her to investigate, and there is no doubt she would have found harm without needing a definition of that discrimination. In fact, she reiterated that tonight in answering my questions. To be clear, there is an established definition of anti-Semitism, but it doesn't matter. That's a red herring. What happened when Trustee Blackburn spoke to the Jewish teacher and referred to Jews as having power was anti-Semitism under any definition. The OCDSB has a clear policy, Code of Conduct Policy 3.7, that we all agree to, that at all times trustees shall treat persons equally without discrimination based on their race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, marital status, family status, disability, or socioeconomic disadvantage. I take that seriously, and I think my colleagues around the table also take that seriously. This provision applies to all forms of written and oral communication, including media interviews and correspondence via social media. I submit that Trustee Blackburn breached policies 3.5, 6, 7, and 9 and must be sanctioned accordingly. I reject Integrity Commissioner Craig's conclusions. Her report gives the OCDSB Board of Trustees carte blanche to discriminate against Jews without repercussion. Her report sends a signal to the Jewish students, staff, and community, and to me as a Jew, that the OCDSB will not recognize and address anti-Semitism the same way that we recognize and address every other form of discrimination. If Integrity Commissioner Craig's conclusions are accepted by the Board of Trustees, this report will make it much more difficult to identify and oppose anti-Semitism, and it allows Trustee Blackburn to continue to offend Jewish community unchecked. I therefore support the motion as moved by Trustee Evans. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to the motion? And since there are no other speakers at this point, I will ask Trustee Milburn, please, to take the chair.
Please go ahead, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I appreciate that this motion has been put forward. I will be supporting it, but I think it does need some greater clarity. And therefore, I would like to propose an actually two amendments. And the first part simply ties this decision explicitly to our consideration of the facts in the Integrity Commissioner's report, which was replete with examples of the language that was spoken and written throughout this whole series of events. So if that could be put up on the screen, please. So my first amendment is to add at the beginning, with due consideration of the facts set out in the report of the Integrity Commissioner presented to the board on 26 November 2024. That's my first amendment, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I apologize. I am chair. Is this considered a,
It needs a seconder.
sorry, we need a seconder. Trustee Lyra? And is this considered a friendly amendment around the table? I'm looking around the table. I am seeing nodding, so that is considered friendly and that is adopted. Please go ahead.
And my second proposed amendment to the motion would delete the words "a breach of" and substitute "find that Trustee Donna Blackburn has breached sections 3.5, etc."
All right, thank you. I'm looking for a seconder. Trustee Presley, I'm looking around the table. Is this considered a friendly amendment? I am seeing nodding heads. Back to you, Trustee Scott.
And if I may comment further with regard to the main motion that's on the floor, certainly the Integrity Commissioner's report was difficult and complex reading. I appreciated the examples, which were relatively recent judicial and quasi-judicial decisions that she brought to bear on this. However, I really had difficulty coming to the same conclusion because although there are many different definitions of anti-Semitism out there, pretty much all of them have the same or very similar cores. And one of our concerns here is that it is not just a matter of looking at the definition itself. It is also a matter of looking at the context in which the language or gestures or other acts were happening. And when I review what happened, I do find that it is absolutely essential to support this recommendation. And that is all, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Trustee Scott. Chair, back to you.
And so if there are no other speakers, do we have one more speaker to the report?
Trustee Bell.
Sorry, who?
Trustee Bell.
Oh, Trustee Bell, go ahead.
Thank you. Chair Scott, I just heard you say that about the importance of taking into account the context and the surrounding issues with regard to the decision that has been made and the facts that have been set out. And so I was wondering if someone could clarify for me if there was, in fact, an apology from Trustee Blackburn with regard to her actions and specifically to the trope that has been raised today. I ask this because I also recall that within the report there were references to an error in judgment given the circumstances and how the respondent was in short form incredibly passionate about what was happening with regard to OCDSB withdrawing from the Pride Parade.
Thank you for that. I believe that there are a couple of references there, and I will go to Ms. Craig to clarify.
Through the chair. Thank you, Trustee Bell. This is one of those instances where I do have information from the respondent and further information during the course of my investigation about the private conversation and how it did continue after those impugned statements. I feel uncomfortable communicating what is not in my report. Suffice it to say that based on all the information that I had, including a continuation of that matter, that I felt that I could rely on an error in judgment in good faith. I can't state what I have not included in my report, but I do know that in speaking to and looking at subsequent information from the complaint, I felt comfortable that that was an appropriate and just finding.
Through you, Chair, with regards to, I believe it's 3.7.
Can I make a point of order? Can I just ask a question? Is she allowed, is the Integrity Commissioner allowed to add something that isn't a fact included in the report?
She can comment on what was in the report and how it got there, certainly.
But she was just commenting on something that's not in the report. So I'm asking for that to be struck.
To be very clear, through the chair to Trustee Kaplan-Murphy, I'm not commenting on something that is not on the report. I'm responding to the question that I cannot fully complete my answer because of what is not in the report. There's a distinction. I'd appreciate if all could note that.
Thank you for that. So back to you, Trustee Bell.
With regard to specifically 3.7 and the issue of discrimination, I was wondering if the mover could speak to how I believe it is the teacher was discriminated against by Trustee Blackburn.
That will have to wait until wrap up.
Okay.
Did you have anything further, Trustee Bell?
Again, I'll reiterate what we heard from Trustee Milburn, which is I'm really disappointed that we find ourselves here again tonight. I think there are many communities with which have been continually hurt by actions around this table. And I think that we as trustees can do a lot better and show that we are the leaders and we want leaders in our community to reflect the principles that we see in our schools and the values and ethics that we hold. And so with that, I look at myself and my actions, and I compel others around the table to look at their actions and think about how they can hurt many already traditionally marginalized communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. Moving on, I have two more speakers on my list, Trustee Lee and then Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under normal circumstances, with the Mr. Gatley can put the wording of the motion back up. Since I think the wording of it doesn't allow by voting by section, I probably have to make an amendment on this to break up 3.5, 3.6, 3.7, 3.9 into 4 separate sub-resolutions.
So are you asking to have separate votes on each of the identified breaches?
Yes, if that can be allowed under the way that it's worded.
That can be done.
Okay.
And going to Trustee Presley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Firstly, I'd like to echo some of the statements made by my colleagues about the level of respect experienced and given by members of the board. This is an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved, and mistakes have been made. Taking into context the situation outlined in the report, I do believe that Trustee Blackburn has breached the code of conduct. However, as referenced by the Integrity Commissioner, I don't believe it was, I believe she made an anti-Semitic statement. That is clear. However, I do not believe that she meant it to harm. However, harm was caused, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. Trustee Blackburn has been doing a lot of work on herself and in improving, and I do see that. There was a breach of the code, and I think that we need to act accordingly. However, in the spirit of collegiality between all of my trustee colleagues and the sessions that we've been going through, I would hope that we can take the appropriate steps to remedy this and move forward and not hold that against each other in future. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Presley. And with that, Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Trustee Presley, and to my other colleagues for their sharing their thoughts. We're elected officials. We are in a privileged position where our actions, our words matter. And we must be mindful and take into consideration that we may unintentionally cause harm. We must act in ways that foster trust and respect. And as Board of Trustees, we must acknowledge that we have caused harm, and we need to work. We've had a lot of professional development in terms of a board working together, and we still have work to do. But I think it's really important that we acknowledge that harm was caused, and we need to do better. And I as well, I'm sorry that we are once again in this position. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And are there any other speakers? If not, I will go to Trustee Lyra and ask if she could please respond to Trustee Bell's question in her wrap-up.
This is wrap-up?
This is wrap-up.
Okay. So Trustee Bell has asked how 3.7 was violated. So I'm sure you are all aware of microaggressions and macroaggressions, and I think it is self-evident that harm is caused when you use microaggressions to a person who is impacted by the language that you are using inadvertently or not. To Trustee Presley's point, I find it difficult to accept the argument that it was done inadvertently when this board had a training on anti-Semitism and the respondent declined or the respondent skipped that training. And so I think it is putting oneself in a position to not know is at some point intentionally skipping out on the opportunity to learn and to be better. And I know we have not yet had a conversation about sanctions, but I would be leaning in a restorative justice approach to a sanctions conversation. My goal is not to punish. My goal is to teach. And I would love to take a leaf out of some of the other code of conduct sanctions that have been lobbied, used around the province, where trustees have been required to take training. And so if a breach is found, that is the direction I foresee sanctions taking, or I would be moving that sanctions take. So I think I have answered both Trustee Bell and Trustee Presley's questions, and I didn't make a note of any other questions that had been asked. So with that, I'm going to thank Trustee Scott for the amendments. We've had some conversations as a board about making our motions more clear and less nebulous. And the addition of all of the language that Trustee Scott has included, I think, does make this much more clear what's going on. And with that, I would encourage all of my colleagues to vote your conscience.
And so we have been asked to do the vote separately. I will remind my colleagues that this decision is only on whether or not the code of conduct was breached. If it was breached, we have an opportunity to consider whether there should be any sanctions or no sanctions and what those sanctions would be. But right now, all we are deciding is whether the code of conduct was breached. And I think I have found the right place so that I can identify the language of the section because we will vote on this in four parts. First, in terms of the breach of section 3.5, and section 3.5 states, board members shall discharge their duties loyally, faithfully, impartially, and in a manner that will inspire public confidence in the abilities and integrity of the board. So with that understanding, I will ask if Mr. Gatley could open the vote. And I remind my colleagues that we need a 2/3 majority for the motion to carry. That means 8 of the 11 trustees who are eligible to vote. And Trustee Bell, if you need to vote by voice, please do.
No, I have casted my vote on eScribe. Thanks.
Sorry?
I've casted my vote on eScribe.
Oh, you did. Oh, excellent. And in the case of section 3.5 of the Code of Conduct, that part of the motion is carried, 11 in favor, none opposed. And now moving on to consider the breach of section 3.6 of the Code of Conduct, which is when acting or holding themselves out as a board member, attending board events, or while on board property, trustees shall conduct themselves in a manner that would not discredit or compromise the integrity of the board. And again, I will ask Mr. Gatley, please, to open the vote. And in this case, this part is also carried, 10 in favor, 1 opposed. But that still meets the 2/3 threshold. And so we will move on for the vote on with regard to section 3.7 of the code. Section 3.7 states, at all times, trustees shall treat persons equally without discrimination based on a person's race, ancestry, place of origin, color, ethnic origin, citizenship, creed, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age, marital status, family status, disability, and/or socioeconomic disadvantage. This provision applies to all forms of written and oral communication, including via media interviews and correspondence and via social media. So, Mr. Gatley, we can have the vote opened again, please. And in this case, we have 8 in favor, 2 opposed, and 1 abstention. And on the final part relating to which sections of the code were breached.
Sorry, Chair, Executive Officer over here. I just want to, you should stay out on the record that that motion carried, just to be clear for the record. I don't think you did, but.
It is carried because it did receive the required 8 votes in favor. Moving on then to the last one, section 3.9. And section 3.9 states board members shall ensure that their comments are issue-based and not personal, demeaning, or disparaging with regard to board staff or fellow board members. And again, if we could have the vote open, please. And we have a result, and in this case, again, the motion is carried with 9 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention. So that means that in sum, all four listed breaches of the code of conduct that the trustee Blackburn has been found to have breached all four of the listed sections of the code of conduct that were in the original motion. And having found that there was a breach, we must now decide on sanctions, if any. As noted previously, the board is not required to follow the Integrity Commissioner's recommendations regarding sanctions, but it must make its own decision. The number of sanctions that are available to us is limited. A motion of censure, a motion to miss a board meeting, or a motion to not be allowed to sit on one or more committees for a period of time to be determined by the board. And again, I have a list here, beginning with trustee Larry.
Chair, can I interject for 1 second? There's a fourth available option under 4.42 of the code, which says that the board shall not impose a sanction that's more onerous than the three you've already mentioned, but that it can impose one that is less onerous, including such things as successfully completing professional development courses.
Thank you very much for that reminder. And so I will look to trustee Lyra.
I would like to move a motion that will forthcoming on the screen. So I would like to move a motion, be it resolved that the sanctions for these breaches be as follows. Formal censure, mandatory anti-Semitism training, the provider of which is to be determined by the chair and at the expense of the trustee's OCDSB professional development account, and suspension from all committees until the completion of that training is completed to the satisfaction of the chair. Be it further resolved that the chair may, if necessary, appoint another trustee to an interim committee position for the duration of the sanctions. Second.
I am going to ask in this case because I think particularly with regard to the third part, I will ask for a staff comment in terms of does this fit with the policy and legislation?
Has the motion been seconded?
It has not yet been seconded, but before I look for a seconder, I would like to know whether or not this will work.
From my reading of it, I think the three provisions there do fit within the provisions of the code. What I would say is that where we're talking about the third bullet there, the suspension, that we should indicate specific timing of that. I know that it's linked to the completion of the training, but perhaps then we should put some specific timing as to when the training can be completed. Otherwise, we're in an indefinite situation here.
Thank you very much for that. I will go back to you, trustee Lyra.
So my concern about putting specific timing is I don't have a list of all anti-Semitism training that is currently available. And even if I did go and find such a list, I don't know what the respondents' availability is like. And so rather than try and say it has to be done by X or Y, or trying to say it has to be done at X or Y or by X or Y, just saying that until it is completed to the satisfaction of the chair sets an end condition that is time-based without trying to figure out what an appropriate place or provider of said training is on the fly without that expertise or in-depth knowledge.
So you are preferring to leave the wording as it stands, and I will ask, is there a seconder for this? Trustee Kaplan-Murth, are you seconding this?
May I second it and sub-amend it or amend
You
it?
can't until,
Okay.
right now, we're still in introduction.
So I'll
the-
second it and then, yeah.
Okay, so you will second that.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a point of order that this motion should be out of order as the third item is more onerous than what is stated in the policy with regards to a 6-month limit on the suspension of committees, because this does not preclude that suspension lasting longer than 6 months.
And that is absolutely correct. So being and it would be barred from sitting on as opposed to suspended. And so I think what we should do is to take a brief recess here to see if we can sort out some wording before, so we don't end up tangled in amendments and sub-amendments forever. So I will call a brief recess and ask if the mover and any of the people who are concerned about the language can have a conversation with the executive officer. Your seats. And I would like to call our board meeting back to order again. We do have some language sorted out. And the first thing I'm going to ask is whether the mover will withdraw the motion. This is probably the least messy solution. Withdraw the motion that has been moved and seconded, and then be able to put a new one. So is there consent? Number one, are you withdrawing it?
I am happy to remove this language and replace it with the other language.
And is the board agreeable to having the motion withdrawn? I'm seeing no objections, so floor back to you, trustee Lyra,
All
for
right.
the new motion and introduction.
Be it resolved that we're going to need a new seconder. Be it resolved that the sanctions for this breach be as follows. 1, a formal censure. 2, mandatory anti-Semitism training, the provider of which is to be determined by the chair and at the expense of the OCDSB's professional development account. 3, suspension from all committees until the sooner of the completion of the training referenced in section 2 above, or 6 months from the date of this resolution. And the chair may, if necessary, appoint another trustee to an interim committee position for the duration of the sanctions.
And is that seconded by trustee Kaplan-Meier? Thank you. Did you have any further introduction?
Yes, I have introduction. So I am a believer in restorative justice. I'm a believer in that we are a learning institution, and I recognize that mistakes happen, and we want to teach people not to make these mistakes. I think, 1, it is important that there is a formal censure, because I think it is important that the district make clear that we will not tolerate anti-Semitism from our leadership team or our students. And so I think it is important that we formally say we, the board, do not agree with this behavior. 2, I believe that anti-Semitism training will provide the information necessary for the respondent to not make these mistakes in the future. I really do believe that we can teach everyone to be the best version of themselves. And unlike other districts, I have not made the respondent personally accountable for the cost of their own training. I think it is reasonably borne by the professional development of the OCDSB. And 3, the suspension from all committees until the completion of the training, or 6 months, as the 6 months is the provision set out in our bylaws and the legislation, incentivizes the trustee to take this training seriously and complete it in a reasonable time frame. And the last clause, the chair may, if necessary, appoint another trustee to an interim committee position for the duration of the sanctions, is to ensure that any of our committees to which we have appointed trustees do not go for want of a trustee. I think that we have been foolish in not including this in previous sanctions. And so if we are choosing to suspend someone for a period of time, I think it's really important that the committees that we have appointed this person to continue to have trustee representation on them, so that the important discussions that they have are brought back to the board table. Thank you.
And the first speaker on my list for this is trustee Kaplan-Meier.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I heartily agree with trustee Lyra that we should take a restorative justice approach, and that the goal of this is to ensure that there is no longer anti-Semitism amongst our ranks or in our community. I would ask that we amend this to say that there are 2 parts to it, that one is the mandatory anti-Semitism training, and that the second part is a suspension from all committees for 3 months or until the completion of the training, which could be up to 6 months, but hopefully that would not be the case. I think that, to be consistent, when we look back at all other sanctions that have been imposed in the past, there has been a timed sanction, and it would send a message that we take this as seriously as we've taken any other issue. We've found trustee Blackburn to be in breach of 4 aspects of our code of conduct, and to only ask her to do anti-Semitism training while important isn't enough. So I would ask that we say formal censure, number 1, number 2, the mandatory anti-Semitism training, number 3, suspension from all committees for 3 months and until the sooner of the completion of that training or the 6 months of the date. So-
I'm trying to understand exactly what your amendment is, so.
I'm saying that the suspension should be a set minimum of 3 months and up to a maximum of 6 months if she hasn't completed the training within that time. But I would like to see that a component of this is she's suspended for 3 months from committee. I think that there are enough reasons in terms of all the breaches that we found that some form of formal suspension from committees for 3 months would be reasonable.
I think in that case, you need to change the language so it would make sense for 3 months or until, or, well, no.
I'm making it sort of I'm just making it a very clear-cut, easy thing to say suspension from all committees for 3 months. I think that mandatory anti-Semitism training aspect of it should be completed within the 6-month period that Trustee Lyra suggested. But,
So are you trying to say, though, that the 3 months would be a minimum amount length of
correct.
suspension?
I'm saying a minimum of 3 months, but clearly a maximum of 6 months, and that requirement to have completed the anti-Semitism training.
So you really are saying for a minimum of 3 months?
Correct.
And is there a seconder for this amendment? And I am not seeing a seconder for the amendment. So the amendment is not going on for debate. Did you have any further comment on the main motion?
So my further comment on the motion is that today the board's decision is we are trying to address anti-Semitism in our district, and we're trying to show a willingness to address institutional and systemic discrimination head on. In my opinion, the trustees today have sent a clear signal to the Jewish community that we will protect them from anti-Semitism. However, we are saying that one session on anti-Semitism training suffices in the face of what in the past for other sanctions against trustees would have been at least a 3-month suspension. So I don't see that we are sending a very clear message to the Jewish community here. So, I mean, I think this is a good start, but I don't think that it's sufficient. I also worry about her participation on ACE, given that she's the representative on a committee on equity, having just been found in violation of our own human rights policies.
Thank you, Trustee Kampen-Mirth. Next speaker on my list is Trustee Lee, followed by Trustee Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My only comment is a request to vote for this resolution in parts.
So we do a vote on the 3 parts of the
Correct.
sanctions separately? And that brings me to Trustee Dixon.
Through you, Chair. I like 1 and 2, but I just want clarity on the formal censure. Like, what does number 1 really entail, for 1? And can I get the answer to that first, and then I can continue? Is that okay, Chair?
And in terms of formal censure, that is specified in the language in the Education Act and Regulation. And basically what it is a public reprimand. And that's it. There's nothing else attached to it. It's simply the language that you have been subjected to a motion of censure.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I will continue. I'm fine with number 1. I'm okay with number 2. Number 3, I have a big problem. I think because we don't know when or how long it will take to be able to take the course. And I don't think we should take her off any of the committees. I think we should find out before we continue with number 3 to find out exactly how long it will take to have that course, because that course could take, she might not be able to take one till the end of the year because again, she does have another job. So we have to take that into consideration. And so I feel we should take off number 3 and set a maybe a 3-month due date to have the course done, depending on when she can get in and be able to take it. But to take her off all the committees, I'm not going to, I vote against that. I think we should take that off the table. And last but not least, I think we should, instead of having her off all those committees, I think we should have her do a public apology to the Jewish community.
Thank you.
I've said a lot, so I'm not sure which one will work within this, but I think that to me would be a little bit more fair and just.
And did you wish to amend the motion to that effect?
Yes, please.
And
so through you, Chair, I'm not sure how to word it, but I would like to completely take off 3A.
Well, the way to okay, so that is a legitimate amendment to start with.
And then I like all 3, like suspension from all committee until this.
If you're going to take all of that out, we could simply have a separate vote on each part, and you could just vote against that whole thing.
I would like to leave B in, and in saying 6 months, we give her anywhere between 3 to 6 months to complete the course, right? But it also says she's going to be off all committee, and I don't think she should be off all committee. Is that number 3? Okay, so I would like to strike out number 3 then.
Sorry?
I would.
You're not going to amend it?
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, that went over my head.
So are you going to amend it or not?
Yes. Okay, I'm going to put forward number 4 that or replace it with a public apology.
So you would like to add a 4th sanction?
Yes.
And that is a public apology.
Yes.
Sorry, Chair, before we go too far down that line, there's no provision in the code to allow for a forced apology.
And if we can't do that, then I would have to rule that out of order, and I won't ask for a seconder. So you still have the option, if you don't like any part of this, to vote against, since we already have agreed to vote on the 3 parts separately. So other speakers to the motion with regard to sanctions? Trustee Forty.
Trustee Bell is before me, though.
Trustee Bell and then Trustee Forty.
Thank you very much. Through you, Chair, I would like to reiterate the context in which these messages were sent. Many in our community have said that pulling out of the Pride Parade was a homophobic action on a part of the board. And I think the importance of rectifying your mistakes is very important. And it's clear, the way that we voted, that there was a mistake made. But I think that if, in fact, we are to sanction Donna Blackburn to take anti-Semitism training, I think we all should be sanctioned to take homophobia training as well. Thank you.
Point of order. I think that's out of order, that comment. That wasn't appropriate to this context at all.
Trustee Bell, the Pride Parade is not the subject of this discussion. Our concern here is what sanctions should apply, given that the
Yes.
board found breaches of the code.
And the context that was brought forth through the facts is that Donna Blackburn was a lesbian woman at the time that this happened. Well, she is a lesbian woman, at the time this happened. And it was within the context of the withdrawing from the Pride Parade. So those are the facts.
Trustee
that were
Bell,
part
it
of
was in that broad context, but the actions occurred in much smaller contexts.
Yes, they occurred
Point of
within that
order.
context.
I would like
I'm
her to
reminding-
withdraw those comments, please.
Trustee Bell, do you have any comment on the sanctions specifically?
Yes, on the sanctions, as I've said, I believe that there should be sanctions. People should rectify their actions when they've made mistakes. And I fully agree with that. And I think that there is a greater context that we as a board need to look at when it comes to mistakes. Thanks.
Thank you. Trustee Forte.
A little bit of a difficult subject here, but I think it's important for all of us to take accountability for this. And I'd be happy to step forward and take the mandatory anti-Semitism training with Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you for that. Any further discussion on the sanctions? We are dealing with these as board now. Trustee Kaplan-Murthy, you've already spoken on this motion.
I asked as a point of order if Trustee Bell can please withdraw her comments about Capital Pride having been a homophobic decision. That is an assertion that's inappropriate at this time.
Trustee Bell has already been told that her to mind her comments. So we're not dealing with another point of order here. She does not currently have the floor, and she's not the most recent speaker. So are there other speakers to the motion on sanctions? And I'm seeing none. I will go back to Trustee Lyra for wrap up.
Thanks. So I appreciate the consternation my colleagues may face about suspending somebody from committees. I also faced consternation trying to decide whether or not a suspension was appropriate. I was reminded that this is not the first time the respondent has gotten into code of conduct situations with regards to equity-seeking groups. And one of the things that our code specifically speaks to is escalating or progressive discipline. Our board talks about progressive discipline in all aspects when it comes to students, when it comes to staff, when it comes to anything at the district. And progressive discipline in this case doesn't mean discipline from the left. It means discipline that gets incrementally more punishing. And so Trustee Blackburn has been a trustee for 14 years, I believe now. And in that time has had a number of code of conduct violations. I appreciate the concerns about the severity or perceived severity and the extenuating circumstances. And on balance, I feel this is fair. I weighed a lot of things when I was trying to come to this determination. And in the name of restorative justice, I think that the training is probably the most important of the three things on here. And so I would encourage all of my colleagues to support this.
Before we take the vote, I think it is important to make one correction to the statements just made with regard to trustee Blackburn. To my recollection, in 14 years of service on the board, trustee Blackburn has actually only been found to have breached the code of conduct once. What was the second time?
My recollection is that trustee Blackburn was found to have violated the code of conduct with regards to trustee Bronovin's children and with regards to the child in the park.
That's correct. I stand corrected. Thank you.
It's been a long time.
So moving on then to the vote, we have been asked to vote on these three parts of these three sanctions separately. The first one, the motion to do a formal censure. I will ask Mr. Gatley if he could open the vote on that, please. And this has received the 8 votes in favor. So this part of the motion with regard to a formal censure has carried. And we will now move on to the second part of the motion regarding anti-Semitism training. And in the second part of the sanctions, mandatory anti-Semitism training, that is carried unanimously. And now we move on to the third part of the meeting, which would be suspension from committees for a period of time. And the motion to suspend from all committees is defeated with 4 in favor, 7 opposed. And that concludes debate on this motion. On this. So we're good. And we do have some other items to discuss this evening. And so I will call a 5-minute recess, please, because I don't want to curtail our opportunity to discuss the board's financial situation. So 5 minutes, and then we're back again. So could trustees and staff please take their seats again? Can we have trustees and staff back in their seats again? And I would like to call our board meeting back to order. We have discussion items this evening that we have on our agenda. The first of which has been one that a number of people have asked for. And so I would like to proceed with our agenda to the discussion item and ask the director and associate director to go ahead and present the report. Trustee Larry, you have your hand up.
I do. Madam Chair, given the late hour and the contentious topic, I would like to move that we defer item 15.1 to the Agenda Planning Committee to bring back at a committee of the whole in December.
You are allowed to refer it back to agenda planning. What I will say is that we are anticipating a lot of very full agendas over the next while. I'm not sure that there will be a very good opportunity to look at this before January. If this is something that trustees felt they really wanted to understand sooner rather than later, they should not vote to defer or to refer it back to agenda planning. If they are prepared to listen to a short presentation tonight, they should vote accordingly. So I will call the question on the motion to defer. Oh, we need a seconder for that. Trustee Dixon will second. On the motion to refer back to agenda planning to bring back at a later time. All those in favor? And opposed? And the motion to defer fails. And so I will ask the director to introduce, and I'm assuming go to AD Gerard.
Through you, Madam Chair, straight over to the Associate Director. Staff has understood the spirit of the brief introduction.
Through you, Chair, I'll go with start next slide. So, yeah, so this is the compliance results for last year. We originally had budgeted a balanced budget, but the end result was a $12.1 million deficit for this year. Next slide. And so first I'll talk a little bit about the revenues. So we received increased revenues in per pupil foundation allocation, special education allocation. Some of it was in the language allocation, increased teacher qualifications. The majority of the revenue increases we saw were directly attributable to Bill 124 and the cost of living allowance increases by the ministry. The one exception to that was there was some additional students in the English second language funding envelope, approximately 900 students, which also gave us some additional revenues. As well, what we did see was a decrease in our PPFs not related to Bill 124 from the previous fiscal year. Next slide. The impact of Bill 124 in particular was about $19 million in underfunding for the district. This is what drove our deficit situation. We were on track to surplus funding, but Bill 124 and the cost of living allowance pay raises eventually put us in a deficit position. Next slide. The overview of expenses. So replacement costs remain pretty steady from previous year when you factor out the pay increase. In fact, they reduced a little bit. School operations and maintenance continue to feel the pressure of inflation and climate change pressures. The largest increase in expenses related was related to the Bill 124 and the cost of living allowances. And then there was not impacting compliance, but asset retirement obligations on the consolidated financial statements. Next slide. So areas of concern, chronic underfunding in some areas like replacement costs and portable moves have reduced the flexibility within the district. School operations and maintenance continue to experience inflationary pressures. Fluctuating student registration is expected over the next few years, and it's making it extremely difficult to do realistic or accurate budget projections. So we have been trying to be as conservative as possible in those areas, and I think that will be the way we move forward. Inflation continues to increase pressures across in all decisions, all services, and the district's lack of reserves has left us very vulnerable to unexpected costs, in particular the pay raises. Next slide. So I'm going to ask the trustees to really champion 2 areas for advocacy this year. In particular, replacement costs. If we could solve that one problem from a funding formula perspective, we would not be in the situation that we are in today. So I really want to encourage trustees to be active in this particular area. This is about $17 million in underfunding to this district in this area alone. And then the other area, special education. We do run a deficit in special education, and the needs are continually increasing. And I think it's another area that we should be advocating strongly with the ministry for additional resources, and we should be using our special interest groups to help us with that. Next slide. So in summary, the Ministry of Education will expect a recovery plan and most likely a surplus budget next year. We have shaved the ice cube to the point now where we're going to have to start looking at real savings, which will require program change. Rebuilding the financial reserves will need to be a priority during the next budgeting phase and exercise for next year's budget. And we're in the process now of gathering data in several areas, benchmarking, to help us in coming up with a longer term plan. But it does take time to develop and implement a long-term plan. And so this is not something that we're going to be able to fix in 2 months. This is going to be a process 2 to 3 years to get us back in the place where we should be as an organization. And that should be it.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And I have on my list Trustee Lyra.
Thanks. I'm going to start by confirming that we're in rules of committee, as this has not come before the board before.
This has not come to board before, but it was at audit committee, and our time is not long tonight. So if you can do your bit in 5 minutes, that would probably be good.
Okay. So I'm going to start with a question to either the agenda planning or the executive officer. This report is an annual report that has historically come to committee of the whole, where our external partners and other stakeholders have input into it. How is the decision made not to bring it to committee of the whole this year?
Through you, I can answer that. Through you, this actually, in the past, we gave this presentation as part of the consolidated financial statements, but because the results were so different than they have been compared to the budget, this was the first time since I've been here in the 3 years that I've given this presentation that we separated it, because I didn't want to confuse our district's financial results with the approval of the financial statements. But normally when I do present the district's consolidated financial statements, I usually give this is the precursor to that. And so that's what the reason why at agenda planning, we talked about the best way to make sure that we approve the financial statements and we didn't get it confused with our district financial results, which is why we separated it as a matter of discussion.
There is a $12 million hole in our budget. How are we planning to fill that over the course of this year?
Through you, Chair. So we have a $12 million deficit from last year. The net result of that was $11.1 million that we are going to have to work with the ministry on to pay back. So we did have a bit of accumulated reserves left. And so that's where from a balance sheet perspective, where we are. How short we are this fiscal year will depend upon our revised estimates. So revenues and expenses change all the time. I do expect that revised estimates that we will actually be bringing another deficit potentially forward, because again, this is not a problem that we can fix in 2 months. But we are taking actions to develop a long-term plan to put us, and this is where I'm talking about shaving the ice cube. We've done that, and now we're in a situation where we need to look at elementary program review will be a part of the solution here. Certain activities and programs that we're currently providing, we're going to have to look at whether or not we can continue to provide those activities within the district long-term. We've brought some of those before to the board in the past, but things that we're not funded for or things that we're spending more than the funding we're receiving, we're really going to have to take a close look on whether we can continue to do that.
How do we plan to engage the stakeholders that usually sit around the cow table who will not have had the opportunity to speak to this in where that $11 million is going to come from?
Through you, Chair, when we develop the plan to going forward, these will go through the committee of the whole budget. So this will all be part of the process where everybody will have a say in how we address these shortfalls.
I'm reassured to hear that. Okay. Those were my questions. Thank you.
Does anyone else have questions with regard to this report? Trustee Presley.
I don't have a question so much as a comment, if it's allowed, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say thank you, Randy, for using the specific language you did and creating avenues for the advocacy committee to help advocate for our board and the underfunding. So I'm very appreciative of that, and I thank you.
And in that regard, I believe that we have an advocacy strategy committee meeting scheduled for the 3rd of December. Mr. Director?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, my thanks as well to Associate Director Giroir and General Manager Adam Swaith for all their efforts on this particular report, and also of note to thank our school administrators in particular. We explained our financial predicament to them during the course of the 2023-2024 school year, and there were significant efforts made day in, day out, decision by decision on the part of our school leaders as well as our system leaders to try and reconcile our budgetary situation. And as our Associate Director mentioned, were it not for cost of living increase and our settlements, rightly so, for our collectively bargained agreements, we would have been in a position of being in the black, and that's in large part from the leadership on site through our principals and vice principals.
And does anyone else have questions with regard to this? In that case, I will say again, much appreciated to have the short slideshow. And it's good because now we can go back and look at that over and over again as we start to think about how do we deal with this and how do we strategize around it. Moving on then, item 15.2, report from OSTA representatives. Do we have a report this evening, Trustee Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As announced yesterday, OSTA has now appointed a new GM CAO that will take effect on December 16th. So Stacy, who is well known to the district as the General Manager in Learning Support Services, will be joining OSTA as the new GM.
Thank you very much for that. Are there any questions for Trustee Lee?
I do have a question. I'm wondering, Trustee Lee, if you would be able to speak with OSTA about potentially undertaking a campaign in regards to our school buses and how cars should be stopping when the flashing lights are out. Unfortunately, I've seen too many situations where that is not being adhered to. And I'm wondering if maybe an informational communication campaign might be of assistance to our community members in that.
Noted. I'll bring it to Stacy when she starts.
Any other questions for Trustee Lee? Seeing none, I will move on to the report from OPSPA representatives. Trustee Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Chair Scott and myself will be attending the Board of Directors meeting this upcoming weekend and will report after.
Thank you. Any questions for Trustee Jenkins? And I'm seeing none. The board work plan is attached to our agenda. Several more items have been completed this evening. Others remain still to be scheduled. Are there any questions on that? And again, seeing none, we can move on to new business. Are there any items of new business tonight? And there are not. So having completed our agenda, I declare this board meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.